welcome to the next exciting episode of the Liquid Weekly podcast. I'm your host, Karl, Liquid Weekly Meisterheim, and this, as always, is my favorite co-host and only co-host, Taylor Page.
Hello, Karl.
You might as well just be host. Doesn't it make sense for you to be co-host? Host I? We're two hosts.
Yeah,
What's the group of hosts?
There's
Murder
two.
of hosts? Yeah.
Murder? What is that with
Crows.
mockingbirds? Or crows, yeah. Okay.
Anyway, off to a great start.
Anyway.
So today, Taylor, it is a special day because, when you and I started this podcast, it was always like, it would be great to have the occasional guest on here or there. And yet it quickly morphed into this, everyone loves Taylor. Everyone's willing to put up with Karl, and they all wanted to be on here with us. And so we just had guest after guest after guest, which has been amazing. But every once in a while, we still managed to sneak in a just you and me time. And here we are, just you and me.
Just us. Yeah. It
us.
has been really, really humbling. I don't know what the right word is, that people are just like actually willing to come on and talk about stuff, I was really surprised by that people would be willing to just sit down and chat with us, give us their time for, an hour and a half or whatever. So yeah, it's been cool. But I do need my one-on-one Karl time. So this is nice.
Here you go. Yeah, we got to meet up again. It's been since the fall, I think, right?
Ooh,
we met up once.
Yep.
Had some delicious food.
The weather's getting nice now, so I'll be able to get my motorcycle back out. And not today, but it has
looking out the window.
We had a couple of nice 60, 70 degree days. I've been wearing shorts on the regular now. So we're almost there, Karl. So
we're almost there.
It's almost time. It's almost
mid-April and we're almost there.
Not that I can't travel down to Columbus or whatever when the weather's not as nice, but I always look for good excuses, to get the motorcycle out. So
for sure.
It's not a hard ride. It's nice.
Yeah. It does make me nervous to think that I am encouraging you to ride your motorcycle because I feel like they're so dangerous. I hate to be the cause of anything that would happen to you. So,
well, if it makes you feel any better, I'm going to be riding it with or without, and so. But I do get that. I didn't ride motorcycles. I'd ridden motorcycles. Gosh, as soon as I turned 18, I got one. My dad rode motorcycles most of my life, and so it was just something I was familiar with, or whatever. He was a pastor, so it was kind of like people were always like, "Oh, no, pastor who rides motorcycles, what?" So, but it was just something we could do together. It was nice because, especially, I don't know if you had this, we butted heads a lot. Because I was a dumb teenager and thought it got a little too big for my britches at a certain point. And so, but motorcycles was just always something we had. And so, but anyways, after we had, Kenner and my wife and I had kids, I stopped riding them for a while because that's always been my thing. You can't be scared while you're riding. And I was constantly worried, oh no, what if something happens and I'm leaving my wife with this kid, and she's going to be by herself. And then you have the second kid and all of a sudden you're like, yeah, it's fine. She'll be all right. I got life insurance.
I'm so desperate for anything to do outside this house.
Yeah. So several years after that, then I got a motorcycle again. And I only ride it occasionally. I don't ride it probably as often as I'd like to, but I also don't like spending the time away from my family. My daughter is probably old enough now. I really liked some of my favorite memories when I was a little kid were riding on the back of my dad's motorcycle with him to go to a local lake, like a swimming spot. And so I hope to do something similar with my kids, but my kids are only just getting to the point where I'm comfortable even maybe putting one of them on the bike, kind of type thing. So, but yeah, so don't worry. I'd be riding either way. I get the fear thing and the concern. I appreciate it, but I'm very safe.
Good.
Very safe. It's always the other people you got to worry about. That's the problem.
Oh, I know. That's the thing, too. It's I don't even feel safe in a car. It's the way so many people drive. I suppose a lot of that's in the interstate.
Yeah, it's true.
You should take the back roads.
Having a very loud motorcycle helps people see you, though, so it'll be all right.
Good. Well, let's get into how we're doing this week kind of thing, because honestly, all the things that I would share about my week for the most part are going to carry over into our talk today, which for those of you who are wondering, what are they talking about? We're going to talk about some recent projects I'm working on. We're going to dive a little bit more into Shopify functions, checkout extensions, as well as how do you approach adding a feature to a theme where nothing makes sense. So that'll be a fun one here. But before we do that, real quick, what's been going on in your life, Taylor, other than getting ready to cycle?
Yeah, again, other than getting ready for that, so I'm recovering from a little bit of an injury playing basketball. I took a fall, and I kind of
at your age,
sprained, right? 35, all of a sudden now I'm needing a walker practically. So, but yeah, you roll your ankle or something like that at playing basketball, and all of a sudden
It's over,
you're
man.
down for a week, you
Yeah.
know? So I've had to back off my triathlon training. The thing that actually ended up hurting more was I think I tried to brace myself when I fell, and like an hour or two later, my wrist just was horribly swollen and like just like in a ton of pain. And I need that to, to do this all week. So I've
I
been
heard
wearing
it's
a brace.
important.
Yeah, I've been wearing a brace. So and it's fine. It's just coming back, but just it is one of those things. The older you get, the harder it is to bounce back from that stuff. So that and more personal stuff. Since we're talking a lot about work stuff, I am I got a consult for. I don't know if you've looked into LASIK eye surgery before. You wear glasses. I wear contacts. But my eyes are really bad, so I don't like to wear my glasses because my prescription is very strong. So I can see straight pretty well, but everything on the side is fuzz because in your peripherals, and so it's kind of disorienting. But so I just went and got a consult for that, and they recommended something else or whatever. So hopefully, I'm going to be looking into it. I just have to do a bit more research. I don't know if you've known anyone that has done the ICL surgery in lieu of LASIK. I'd never even heard of it, so I've got a bit of research to do. It's quite a bit more expensive, but they actually insert a type of contact lens into your eye permanently.
Okay.
So, I'm making Carl's getting all squeamish here.
A little uncomfortable.
But so the idea is, it's permanent. You don't have to mess with it. They're not using a laser to reshape your eye, and so really interesting stuff as far as like the actual implementation. But got some stuff to figure out there on a personal note. But yeah, work wise, been staying, busy working with folks and stuff. That's always really good. I just tweeted about a challenge I had the other day, and I'll wrap that up. But I spent, one of those times where you spend a ridiculous amount of time on a single problem, like, and it's been too long, but you have to finish it and you have to get it done. And I finally had to call it and just leave, walk away, eat some dinner with the family, sit down for a little bit.
Yell at the kids.
And then after, what's that?
Yell at the kids, get some stress out.
Yeah, yell at the kids. Yeah. And so did that, and then after dinner, if we don't have like some practice to get off to or whatever, we let the kids have like an hour of screen time watching a show or something like that before doing the bedtime, get ready for all that routine. And I was like, all right, well, I'm just gonna like come back to this a little bit because I really want to wrap this up. And it was done in like 15 minutes. I was like, oh, this is the problem, And so just the reminder of like, sometimes you just have to walk away. I don't know if do you have a rule for that? Like you've tried to work on something, you've rubber duckied it, all this other stuff. You've asked ChatGPT, you've shot down all of its terrible ideas, and you still haven't got to where you need to.
Ask Taylor.
How much time? Yeah, ask Taylor. Sure. My thing would be ask Carl. So how much time do you spend? It was JavaScript, so I didn't ask you. You're welcome. How much time do you get for problems like that? Like 30 minutes, like 40 minutes, like to where you're just like, you know what, this isn't going to get solved right now. I need to walk away and come back. How long do you do? What's your wisdom?
I don't have a set time frame. I think what it is probably what most developers feel is, it's like gambling. There's that thrill at some point of like, maybe this will be the thing. Maybe this will be the thing. Maybe this will be the thing.
Yes.
Right? Because we love to solve problems, so we do this. And at some point that just loses its appeal and you're like, oh, screw it, I'm out of here. So about taking long walks, taking a shower, just getting away from it certainly is helpful because your subconscious is doing stuff, and sometimes you just need to get out of its way.
In the background. Yeah. I had said something about that on Twitter, and that was someone had mentioned like, oh yeah, it's like your brain's running a background job, kind of type thing. It's like, there's that thought, right? So, but yeah, that was one of those things just the other day that came into play. So
nice.
But I've been rambling for a minute. So how about you? What's been going on? I know we're going to talk a lot about your work stuff, but what about the personal life? The eclipse.
Well, actually, the brain subconscious thing is a good segue because I know I'm late to the game, all you people listening, but I just recently finished binging Severance on Apple TV.
Oh, I don't know what that is.
Seen this show? Okay, I won't spoil it, but the premise is that there's a company and they offer the service to their employees where they can become what they call severed, which is they give them the brain implant. And so anytime you're at work in the special floor of work, you are a completely different memory silo, essentially. So you're the same person, but you can only remember things from work. And when you leave that special floor and go home, you can't remember anything from work, but you just remember all your other stuff. And so
interesting.
Yeah, it's a whole thing. And there's way more to it than that. But interesting show. So the subconscious thing got me thinking about it. And
That's
same thing
cool.
with Lord of the Rings. I saw Lord of the Rings in the theater. Had no idea it was a trilogy. Was bitterly disappointed when we got to the end of the movie. It was a cliffhanger. Same thing with Severance. I didn't realize it was a seasonal thing. I thought, oh great, this show is very interesting, but also it's very hard for me to watch at this point. I was looking forward to it being over, and no, it's not over. There's more to come.
There's more to
Which I'm
come.
excited about, but at the same time, it's like I end the suffering for me.
This is cool. I'm gonna have to.
Yeah.
I need more like Apple TV picks because we were just gonna get it again just to watch the Ted Lasso series again,
nice.
just because we liked it so much. But I was like, I don't want to buy it just for one show. So yeah, I need another show. This looks really interesting.
And the terrible thing is I avoided it for years because like the thumbnail that shows up on the screen, the thing that came to mind as I saw it's like this guy in a business suit with his head kind of open. But the thing is Severance. And I was like, oh, it's some boring business thing about some executive and maybe he gets laid off or something. I don't know. But I had no idea it was like this sci-fi kind of thriller sort of thing. So
yeah, that's awesome.
I'm a Luddite.
I'm surprised you didn't save it for your pick. You just messed up. Now you have to come up with another one.
Oh no. Can we edit that?
No.
No, okay, I got a pick. I don't think I shared it before. And it also ties into the whole severed thing. Don't worry, it's not an actual severance. The other thing for me is as the weather's turned, I have a bunch of scrap wood. I don't throw things away.
Yeah.
Especially when it comes to construction. And I dumpster dive when I find a construction site. Get some 2x4, some OSB, you never know, you might need it for little projects that the kids go nuts. Yeah. And so they've built, we call them pallet houses before because they were made out of pallets. And they were getting pretty grungy. So I tore those down. Actually, they tore them down. So crap. So we ended up building new ones, and they're bigger because the kids are bigger. Right. And trying to use it to teach them about construction. So we're like framing walls and like using 2x4 construction and stuff like that. It's like,
that's awesome.
I just assumed I'd have enough scrap lumber. I don't. So it's like, dang, it's not cheap to buy wood. Like,
No, it's pretty pricey, man.
We went in to get studs for the walls the other day because I didn't have enough. And we luckily found they had their 70% off discount area at Home Depot where they put all like the really warped wood that nobody wants. It's like, it's for a place that like we'll make it work. So
it'll be fine.
Thanks to that.
Do you have, I don't know if there's one in Columbus, a Restore, like Habitat for Humanity?
We do.
They have one of those? I would say, have you checked there?
I've been there lots, but they've never, as far as I know, the one by me carry like bulk lumber kind of stuff.
Yeah, they had. Well, the one that I had when we lived in Springfield, Missouri, much larger town or whatever. I actually built a bed frame out of that, like even too, with the lumber that they had there and stuff. And so, but yeah, like that's a good one to check. Maybe they don't have that available, or maybe just get scooped up there. I imagine like a city the size of Columbus, there's people kind of eyeballing that before it comes in, type thing.
I think the one by me, honestly, where they positioned it in the city, it's right on the edge of like two pretty affluent neighborhoods. Not mine, just to be clear. But I think it's probably
my affluent neighborhood, the other affluent.
More to attract donations, probably than necessarily to spend stuff. Yeah. We'll see. Anywho, cool. Well, shall we jump in? I think people like it when we stop talking and start working.
Yeah, we use the chapters. They can skip over this if they want.
Oh yeah. Pro tip of the day.
Pro tip. If you made it this far, now you know you can go back and skip over it. For the second time you listen to this through,
Well, okay, again, for those listening, my original vision, and I'm going off on a tangent thanks to you, when I decided it was worth the time to do a podcast was I really enjoy listening to a podcast called Car Talk, which no longer has new episodes, but I grew up with it and they rebroadcast them. And it's these two brothers talking about car repair, and they have people call in and they answer car questions. So there's a lot of good info, but the best part to me was just listening to the two brothers have a great time, enjoy themselves, and learning a little bit on the way. So I don't know that anyone gets anything near that out of what we do here, but that's why it's never been just about jump into the programming for me. I always wanted to try to build more of a rapport and a conversation and just having a good time with a couple people sort of experience.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and we've got that going. We've got a couple people I think that resonates with. We've got a couple subscribers. Good. So
two listeners. Yeah,
that's
mom and dad.
That's right. I said couple. Thank you both for your continued support.
Anyway, we just do it for the lulz. Really? All right. So today we decided to talk about some projects that I've been working on because they were interesting, and I thought it might be a good opportunity to dig in. The challenge is going to be, since this is primarily an audio thing. At least that's what people think about when they think about podcasts. I don't know how many of you are listening versus watching, but I'll try to do this in a way that makes sense if you can't see a screen. And I probably won't share much on my screen because I can't give it all away. But so this first one, Taylor, I reached out to you about this a little bit, I think. I had a client come in with a request recently to do a project where they have a store, as many Shopify clients do. And on this store, they have a product page. I'll get to it. And they have a product image slider. I think this was the focal theme. And I do front-end work, but that is not my favorite thing to do, right? And so sometimes I feel like I'm a monkey with a hammer in a china shop. That's not the right image. There's a saying. What's bull in a china shop?
A bull in a china shop. Yeah, I don't know about the monkey with a hammer and the... I mean, it's a great image of a monkey swinging around on I don't know.
Yeah,
anyways.
And so like there's a lot of imposter syndrome that can creep in when I do this kind of work. It's like I'm sure someone that knows what they're doing sees a much more elegant path towards this. But actually I don't think there was. Now the story to take you on today. So story is we have a slideshow and the client would like the alt image text for each of the slideshow images to display as captions on the slideshow. Seems like a reasonable request. It's something that should be pretty easy to implement, right? And so how does one approach this kind of thing? So I'm going to kind of break down how I came at this. The first thing is trying, again, it's my naivete, and you just feel free to interrupt me at any time. I'll try to give you natural points to interrupt me, but feel free to stop it. Is figuring out, okay, what the heck is this even using? Like focal, great, but what slideshow software is this? How does this even work, right? So you dig in to the source a little bit and you try to figure that out. Again, I'm speaking as if you know nothing, and obviously those of you listening know something, so forgive me if I'm speaking under you. One of the tools, I think either you or Ann Taylor clued me into this. There's a Chrome plugin called Liquify.
That was from Ann.
That was from Ann, yeah. And it's amazing. So that's my first tip. If you're listening and don't have Liquify installed, get it, because it basically takes over the built-in theme code editor in Shopify on the website and adds a really good search capability, essentially. So you use Liquify, right?
I have. I don't use it regularly enough. No, not necessarily. Okay. I do as much local as I can, but it is really handy.
Well, see, that's the difference. So I guess it kind of depends on your workflow. Yes. My workflow tends to be more in the theme editor in the browser because the stuff I'm doing typically is pretty in and out pretty quick. Right. And the people I work with tend to not use a local focused workflow. Personally, as a hardcore full stack web developer, I would prefer to develop locally. But it's just not, it's
not practical all the time, right?
No, you just need to get it done. So
right. Yeah. Yeah. Horses for courses. That's the phrase.
Wow, that's the second thing that no one's gonna get. Monkeys with the hammer in the china shop and horses for courses.
It's the English version of right tool for the job. I just think horses for courses sounds better.
I've never heard that. That's interesting.
I was talking to someone else from over in England and they said that and I was like, what? And now I use it.
Oh, anyways. Okay. So it's not.
I'm sorry. I'm derailing us here. No, it's not something that's used in the States, really.
Just to be clear, he did make that.
I'm trying to bring it across the pond over here, Carl. This is where it starts, okay?
Right. Most of our nation's history has been about trying to get it back across the pond, Taylor. So
it's true. It's true. I am kind of fighting tradition here. That.
Yeah. Sorry, I was just reading a book about the French-Indian War, or the War of 1812. Sorry, not the French.
Oh, okay. I was like, what?
Yeah. Dude, the brain goes where the brain wants to go. So that's the first thing I would do, right? Is try to figure out what am I actually dealing with here, and I identify what this was. This was focal? It was using Flickity, but it was using a different piece of software for the lightbox because a lot of slideshows, as you know, not only can you click through them, but they often have click on them, kind of zoom in and show a lightbox of the thing. And that was a tool called PhotoSwipe. Why these choices were made, I don't know. I have no knowledge of how focal was made or why they did the things they decided to do. But that's the reality I'm living with. And so being an astute, enterprising lad, I decided to look at the documentation. Surely there's a way to make this work. And lo and behold, there is. Flickity has built-in support for captions, which is amazing. This will be an easy project. And then you start putting the code into place and realize it's not working because turns out the version of Flickity that you have available to you in Focal is about 5 years old. So, womp womp. And the tip there is, it's one thing to like find the references to the slideshow and be like, oh yeah, it's clearly Flickity. But oftentimes these themes, either through a CDN or more often than not, they've included them directly in their assets, have the JavaScript source. And so you can go in there and you can look and see exactly what version you're working with, which can save you some aggravation. Or add to the aggravation when you realize what an old version it is. Now, Taylor.
The versioning thing is always what trips me up.
Yeah. I wrestle with this a little bit. I don't know if you've ever gone this road, but if you are in that situation and you see that the thing being used is really, really old, have you ever tried to upgrade it, or do you just stick with what the theme has? Because
honestly, if
dragons.
If it's that old, I'm just gonna probably try to build a different one. So like if it's that bad, because you could go through that upgrade process, right, or whatever. One of the ways that you could potentially look at doing that I would look at would be a newer version of the theme. So if like the theme is very outdated, it's possible that the theme creators have versioned it and upgraded it all on the path as well. If it's that simple, I mean, I want to try that route first. But as far as updating the theme, no. Like, if I can find the old documentation to make it the shortest point there, then sure. But like, yeah, otherwise, not so much. But what did you choose to do here then?
So my approach to theme development is, well, just so you know, I graduated from mini med school. This is a thing back when I was in college where the medical school, they had a program, a community outreach thing. So you could go, so I like to say I graduated from med school. It was mini med school, but still med school. So I take the doctor approach, which is the Hippocratic Oath, which is when I'm in a theme editing, I do no harm. And so I try as much as possible to not mess with the patient more than necessary, because who knows who's coming after you, and you also want to avoid unintended side effects. And so similar to your take on it, it's like there's no way I'm upgrading this theme code. Like that's just going to be a world of pain, right?
Yes.
And so there's sort of two different ways of thinking about it, which is, okay, what is the right approach? Like utilizing the way the software is built, trying to make it work together the way it's supposed to, or the mercenary/pragmatic approach. And
I like I always mercenary or pragmatic approach. I like that.
That's right. I always try to do like the right approach. And so, okay, once I realized that the right approach initially wasn't going to work because the version was so old, like the built-in support wasn't built in at this particular point in technology. So I was still trying to figure out, is there a way? Like, has someone else figured this out? Because this is not an uncommon thing. And lo and behold, someone had added a way to do this. And so nice. I was trying to backport it, try to get it to work. And this is where you have, as a consultant, you really have to make that trade-off between how much time can I spend on this, similar to you and the walking away sort of thing, right? And because at some point you realize that the setup for the most people were using the software is far different from how it was set up in the theme for whatever reason. And so it was hard to translate between what I'm seeing in the documentation and the code examples and the code pens that people were putting together that showed how this worked versus some of the abstractions that were introduced into how the theme code was calling Flickity, how it was being initialized, how this UI class that it was using internally worked. And then at some point, you're like, I'm going to have to understand the internals of Flickity to know enough to make this work in the way that it's already working in the theme versus what I'm seeing in all these examples. Is that worth it? And as someone who doesn't grok JavaScript on a regular basis, isn't like I'm comfortable, but not like I want to like hack all the things in JavaScript, it quickly becomes apparent that this is a battle in futility. So then you do the next best thing, which is you ask all your friends. So reach out to Taylor, reach out to Anne. Anne, if you're listening, thank you for trying. Reach out to other people and say, does anybody know? Because sometimes there is low-hanging fruit. Yes. And you get that quick response, and you save your client an hour or two of work, at the cost of your friend, however much time it took them. But we all do that for one another.
It's a two-way street. Yes,
exactly.
It's a two-way street. Yes.
You give and you take. So with this particular instance, I was diving into the code, making all those changes. Nothing was working right. it was time for plan B. Scorched earth. This thing is going to work because, I'm a big SpaceX fan. This is not an Elon Musk thing, right? There's a lot there, but I like space. Engineering wise, they're doing some really cool things. And obviously a big part of what makes them tick is this whole first principles reasoning. It's breaking up the problem down, like what actually is involved, like the basic fundamentals of what's going on here. I need to get some data, the image alt text, and I need to display it on the screen when a slide is changed. That's all we're doing here. It's not rocket science.
Right.
See? I reckon that's a good time. That's a whole other Mitchell and Webb look. If you ever seen that thing? Not brain surgery. No, okay.
No.
I'll say, well, maybe that'll be my pick of the week. Anyway. And so do you ever get to that spot as well, Tay? Like when you're working on a project, you're trying to make it work a certain way, and you just kind of take a step back and realize, oh, what actually needs to happen is actually pretty simple. And maybe there's a way to do it.
Yeah, you get so far into it, and you're just at a certain point, you're like, I have been approaching this completely the wrong way. Like I've invested too much time, because you don't want that you have to avoid sunk cost fallacy as much as possible, where like, oh no, like I have to make it work down this path or whatever. Because at a certain point, like if you just realize after doing that to a certain degree and it's not the best, like you have to backtrack a little bit, right? And often the simplest answer is often the best one, right?
Yes. And that's, similar to your walking away to think about the solution. Like I have found on several occasions, I get so fixated on the path I'm on, you begin to lose that peripheral vision like you don't have. And the alternatives sort of fade away. And so sometimes you'll be talking to somebody, they'll say something that's obvious in retrospect, but at the time I was like, oh, that seems completely orthogonal to the way I'm thinking about this. And so I try to keep that in mind, because oftentimes you just lose that perspective, and it could be a much easier path. So that's what happened in this case. I was like, if I'm just going to give up on making this work, the do no harm thing's out the window now. We're going to harm.
Right.
We're going to do lots of harm.
There's got to be some harm. It's going to hurt.
But it's going to hurt. But they're going to feel so much better in the end.
It's a good hurt.
That's right. And so what I realized is, okay, those are the three tenets. I need to get the data.
Yep.
I need to figure out when slides change, and I need to display on the screen. If I can figure out how to do those three things, then I'm good. And so then you can start to dig in, right? You look at the Flickity code, you look at how it's constructing objects, because fundamentally everything involves, like, you just wrap properties together into objects in JavaScript, pass it around, and hope it works. That's JavaScript, in my opinion.
Right. High level overview. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. And so, I was able to dig into the Flickity code, and there's an initialize method, and you can see where it's constructing the object that represents the data for the slides. And you can see where it's reading that data from, right? So based on looking at that, I was able to add a little bit of code. See, now this is where I'm like, should I even share my screen? I don't know if it's even worth it, because no one's going to see it.
Can we drop? Well, let's try. I know we're workshopping a little bit here, but we could just drop this into a gist afterwards to provide in the show notes, so people can take a look at this later. 100%.
I will do that. That sounds great.
Let's do that.
So there's a return statement where they're getting a bunch of stuff and returning the data, and all I did was added one property to the object that was being returned, which again, now I'm injecting my own code into a third-party vendor asset, but it is what it is. And added just the alt tag to that property so I can access it later.
Nice.
So that solves problem number one, and I'm using the console, and I'm checking it. Okay, it's in there. It's consistently working. I switch slides. So I'm good. We're good there. So then I go on to the next step of my problem, which is how do I tell when a slide has changed? And there's a couple ways you can do this. Like obviously you can read through the source. You could use the browser inspector, developer console, whatever, to add a breakpoint on that DOM element. So when it's changed, it will stop, and you can look at the stack and kind of see like where this is coming from. That's one way you can try to figure out where it was changed. Just reading the code can work for you. And Flickity was clear enough that there's a function update per item. It's updating the current item. Like I get that.
Makes sense.
Yeah.
The benefit of well-named variables, huh? Like that's a big deal.
Exactly. You don't have to be a JavaScript savant to get. That's probably what that means. So. And reading the code verified that it did. Yep. And so I did a couple experiments with the console output and stuff, and realized, okay, this is the one that's being triggered as I click around in the slideshow. So we're good. This is where it changed. And so the next question is, can I add the element and display to the screen somehow? So we got the data. We figured out how to know when things are being changed. Can we actually display the sucker?
Mhm.
And this is where I get the most, like, I don't know what I'm doing in life, because I still find aspects of CSS and positioning baffling, especially in a way that will
Sure.
work consistently across screen sizes. And yeah, I've got friends, Paul Ethercycle, like I feel like he's just a
I've
savant.
got
Like,
friends.
yeah, they know what they're doing, right? Tom, all these people, like they're a different class of me. I'm just a humble back-end developer trying to show a text on the screen.
Right.
But you gotta move forward. And this is where that earlier deep dive was helpful, because I had seen examples about how people were adding this to Flickity. Even though it didn't work, some of the principles there worked. In particular, how they were constructing elements dynamically in JavaScript and then adding them to the screen. And so that's essentially all you have to do, right? Is you had to figure out, okay, is there a container for me to put my text? And if not, create it, because the hook I'm using is one that is triggered every time the slide moves. And so I have to assume it's either the initial state where there's no container that's been created because I haven't created it yet, or it's a subsequent move and it's already in existence. So that's the first thing. Check for that. And the second thing was just simply taking that data that I added to the object and injecting it, as text in a span or a div or whatever you want to do into that container, and then move on. And it worked.
Nice.
And
that works.
It works. There was some styling that had to go with that in terms of how to position it relative to the slideshow in a way that makes sense. And you get fancy, you make the font look nice and all that kind of stuff, right? But fundamentally, when I go to my friends, like, hey, look, I actually got this to work. They're like, great, we'll make it look nice for you. Like, thank you.
Let's clean this up a little bit. It works, but let's smooth out these rough edges. That's awesome, man. So another trick that I like to use when you need something really simple is, you just hiding, like you still render all that stuff right to the DOM or whatever, but you're just hiding it with CSS based on that. So you can do that in some instances depending on how it's structured, but then just using CSS queries and stuff like that. So for instance, sometimes I'll do it to where, something like a slideshow, some of these libraries, you can get the active slide. Just that's something that it does, right? Like as it becomes active, like classes change, all this fun stuff or what have you. And so depending on like how it's set up, you can use CSS to conditionally show or hide based on which ones are active. So sometimes, a combination of data attributes and, classes works. But I think what you're doing, obviously with JavaScript and stuff like that, is obviously fantastic too. That's nice that you hooked into the existing system and did it that way instead of, trying to work around it in another way. That's awesome.
Thanks. So you're saying your approach is sometimes it makes sense to statically render everything and then use a CSS selector to only show like what is associated with the current on-screen slide.
Yeah. So for instance, in your example, in your container, like, you might have all of these set to hidden, right? So like we're not displaying anything if the container's empty kind of type thing or whatever. And so what you can do is based on which one is called to active, if that's tied to that in some way, shape or form, you can have both of those display. So you would, technically in this container, you'd have all of those items like accessible in the DOM, like, right? But you wouldn't necessarily be displaying them or whatever. So you can conditionally show and hide the proper one based on when, a class gets updated with a matching attribute or something like that. That's another one. I can't remember. That's an older one that's gotten actually a lot easier to do now because like CSS is getting so good. It's very handy.
That's a really good tip, Taylor. And I think it's something that's easy to overlook, and not just in the context of what I'm describing here. There have been lots of times where I've been struggling with how am I going to do this? How am I going to get the data I need? And then you realize if you would just pre-render it, if you have access to it in Liquid, but you don't have it necessarily through the API or through JavaScript, just render it to the page initially, put it in the DOM somehow that you can understand, and then get it later, like that kind of stuff.
Yeah, we do the same thing. Yeah, a lot with like, for instance, like a good example, like a really common method with like working with variants, right? Like almost all things, like we all like drop in like the JSON for a product's variants,
right?
So that way we can snag it and then get the information that we need later on or whatever. So it's the same thing. Like you're not displaying this giant block of, JSON or whatever, but you're using it, because you have access to it if it's there. So Yeah, just another one of those. And that's the cool thing about web development, right? The good and the bad is there's about 17 different ways to do the exact same thing, so it's about finding the one where you're doing the least amount of harm, both for
And
you
that's why
and
your
the
page
client.
sizes are 10 megabytes each.
It's all in there.
Why is Taylor rendering Wikipedia in every single page now?
Yeah, because I might need it later.
That's right. So that was almost the end of that problem. And then I realized that was the lightbox. I got it to work in the lightbox. But there's also the case where it's on the product page and they haven't enlarged the product image. They're just clicking through on the product page and wanting to display it there too. And that was a different problem because it was a different thing. Because it was the lightbox is Flickity plus photo swipe. Just the product page was Flickity in of itself. And so that one I had to do a little bit of additional digging. But it ended up being easier because I could listen to events being emitted by Flickity.
Nice.
And then based on those callbacks, write a little bit of custom JavaScript code that because that object already had the text in there that I had added previously, find it, grab it using the selected currently active slide trick, which you just mentioned actually, and then set the text. So it ended up being a lot simpler than the first way around, especially once you've committed yourself to the path of just making it work, not trying to make it harmless. But yeah,
that's
you
awesome,
know how it is.
Man.
Every project has that arc where it's like trying to figure it out, and then you get to the top of the hill, and then it's a very steep drop off to you from there to just get it done. And it typically goes a lot quicker, and you care a lot less.
Yep. Just because it's functional, and then yeah, later on you can worry about making it look pretty or whatever.
And that's what every
client for like functionality or whatever. And I don't know if you have good thoughts on that too. Like depends on the client, obviously, but so there's sometimes where like you're just focused on functionality, you're like, okay, like I'm gonna ship this over. It depends on the client, like how early I can show them something.
Yeah.
And I'm sure you run into this as well, where it's like, hey, the functionality is working, like, give me some feedback on the UI you want for this too. But some people, like, you have to wait until it's completely done, because if it's not completely done, they're like, well, this doesn't work at all. It's like, well, no, like it works, but it's hard for some people to segment out the functionality and then the design, right? Or whatever. So I think as developers, we're really used to that, but it is something that's hard for clients in a lot of instances.
Yes. That's a good call out, because I think you really do have to take it client per client, because some folks, they can't look past the pixels, and you don't want to bring more harm to the relationship than you need to. So
yeah, for sure.
Cool. So that's the great Flickity photo swipe slideshow drama of early 2024.
Fighting with libraries. Ugh.
Again, the tip there is, I think, just have that mindset of like, know the tools you have to figure out the state of what you're being given. I often find it very useful to reflect over like, what exactly am I trying to accomplish here? Sometimes projects, you can just get so far into it, you lose sight of the forest for the trees, that whole thing, right? Yeah. We're using a lot of metaphors today. It's good.
We are. This is what happens when we talk, apparently. Like when it's just you and me. A lot of metaphors.
I'm trying to think of what would be the imperial equivalent of forest for the trees. Don't lose sight of the peasants for the nobles. I don't know.
Peasants?
Feudalism. I don't know. It's a thing. Techno-feudalism. I'm not going to go there. And then trying to assess, like, can I do this in a way that, is sort of outside of the theme itself and very contained for the sake of future developers and future maintenance? Or am I stuck in a position where I have no choice but to butcher it, for lack of a better?
It's just, sometimes, and sometimes you do. You just have to gut it,
Yeah.
And something that I've been trying to do a lot more lately, not just for that, but to help myself, like this other deal that I had the other day, because this was a bundler that was, pretty extensive, and that I was working on, that I was stuck on that problem. It's just getting better at writing like comments in code or whatever. Yes. And especially if I don't like how like messy, like just standard comments can, but if you do use liquid comments, right, that doesn't get rendered. And so, which is really nice. So it's in your code base, but not necessarily like rendered to the client and stuff like that. And so I don't know if you've been playing around with this. This was an early issue of yours where you didn't like that Liquid didn't have a simple way to comment single line comments.
You remember that, huh?
Of course I do. So I've been using that nonstop. I don't know if you've worked this into your flow yet, but it is super handy, Karl.
Well, it's a new tag, right? What is it?
Oh, it's not new. It's been around for so long. We just very few people knew about it.
Yeah, you told me and I forgot already. I just know there is one, but I can't remember what it is.
I'll send it to you. It's just literally, your curlies and then the percentage. What's the actual developer
You
term
don't
for
even
this?
know. You don't use
Why
it.
am I blanking on this? The percentage sign,
Lies.
and then an octathorpe or hashtag, and then that's just all single line text. You don't have to write
Octathorpe.
octathorpe. Look it up.
Is this
Bam,
another
I got
British
that
thing?
one. No, that's the actual term for a hashtag. It's
No,
the
it's not.
actual.
Not
It's
hashtag,
totally.
Octathorpe, mate.
It is. I'm not making this up. Mel, now I'm like, you're worried.
I've never heard
because
Octathorpe.
You're
I've been a
worrying
developer
me
for 25 years. I've never heard Octathorpe.
because you're worrying me because you're a very intelligent man.
Oh, well, that's
and now
clearly wrong on both counts.
Get it, man. I'm gonna drop this in the
Octathorpe.
chat to you. It's from the dictionary.
The dictionary. Online.
The Merriam-Webster.com.
Okay.
So it's the legit one. It's not just like the Google term for it or whatever. But yeah, look it up. Octathorpe.
Thanks.
If no one has learned anything about dealing with Swiper.js and Flickity and anything else, you're going to learn about Octathorpe and single line liquid comments. So,
wow. See, and we should include this in the show notes. It's a little bit of fun etymology.
Notes.
Yeah. Okay.
It's going in the show notes.
All right. For that one person that's still with us, so the Octathorpe comments, what we're talking about. Oh, comment in your code. Yeah. The other thing too, back to the how to keep yourself isolated. Sorry, see, I pulled the thread back. Is
good job.
For the most part, emitting events in JavaScript is relatively free. So if you have to hook in to a library like I did, sometimes it's worth it to not put your code directly into the function like I did, but just emit some kind of event so that you could have a callback that lives completely outside of that code that's listening for that event. And then trigger your stuff that way. Add a little comment, be like, this is to support this piece of functionality that I can't figure out any other way to do, kind of thing. But then you've made a very, very minor change. And then in your own code, you can even add a comment stating like, hey, if you ever upgrade this theme, like you need to make sure this event is re-added into this particular aspect of the slideshow so that it continues to work. So there's ways around it, right?
Yeah, there's a lot of really cool, and there are some themes that do a better job with this than others. Like as far as like building in custom events, there's a handful of them that make it real easy to work with stuff. So it is a very nice thing. Archetype themes is probably one of the best that I've seen, and how they handle that specifically. But even Dawn has started to build in some events specifically.
Yeah.
There's not like really good specific documentation in it, but when you start to dig into it, as far as like when the cart gets updated and stuff like that, you can tie into those events, and that is really nice.
Yep. But again, if they don't have it, you can add it. And if you're going to make a change into the internals, make it that change.
There you go.
Did I do it? No, not this time. But it's a good principle to try to live by.
If you have the time, right? Some jobs you just don't have the time, like to do all that, right? Like, and so when you do have the time, yes, like that would be one of the best options you can do there. I'll link up to that, and I've got the liquid inline comment. I did drop that in there, so we'll include that in the show notes too.
Thank you, Taylor. The world's going to be a better place after this episode.
There, the whole world, yes.
I hope that was interesting for folks. I hope it was helpful. Obviously, it feels to have kind of like your cut off below the knees. Is that another expression? To not be able to show the source code and walk through the screen at the same time. This feels like more like an online course or a Delia or something. But I think those are sound principles, and I think a lot of people probably approach projects in a similar manner. So if you don't, and if you heard this and you think, Karl, you're an idiot, please comment. I would like to know. I get that enough from my kids, but I want
inquiring minds. Yes, need to know.
I wanted, I want to do this right. I don't want to just smash around code.
I agree. There's always other developers that just like, man, they've got this stuff figured out, and there's just always a better way to do stuff. But we're all just trying to get better and learn as we go. So I appreciate you sharing your whole thought process. I think that's really helpful for folks. Because again, is laughing. It's a decision. Our Steve's laughing. I think it's a decision for folks, like where it's the whole like which path do I go down? I have folks ask about that pretty regularly. Like, do you build a custom section or do you just try to extend the existing section? Like, how do you make that decision? And the answer is always, it depends. you know, like it really does. So this is just one of those, like, yeah, do you build your own slider from scratch or do you like try to just extend existing functionality? So in general, sliders are terrible and I don't like them. And so I try to just, combat them whenever someone asks for them. But like, hey, like it's super normal practice. So it is what it is. I should say that not all sliders are bad. I guess I'm talking about like the autoplay slideshow or whatever.
You heard it here, folks. People, Taylor hates sliders. But that does make an interesting point, the whole build it from scratch thing, because I feel like with any framework, this is what you run into. Even if you're a senior developer, you look at code for like a third-party library for something like that, it's complex. Like, it's not simple.
Right.
But when you step back and realize the reason it's complex for the most part tends to be because since it is distributed to such a wide audience, it has to have all kinds of configuration options, all kinds of abstractions to support different scenarios you would never encounter. It could be that actually it is very simple for you to implement it for your particular case in your particular way, which maybe you should. But more than that is to keep in mind as you read the source, don't be overwhelmed by what you're seeing, but understand that a lot of it, if you could just pull away those aspects of it, at the core of it would be a pretty simple system that you could reason about. And so I always try to read the code with that in mind. Like, is this configuration? Is this like browser edge case workaround stuff? What am I seeing here? Where is like the core fundamental functionality in this thing?
Oh,
thanks. And I use lots of interesting hand gestures there too.
There were a lot, yeah. People on the podcast are not going to see it, but they were there.
They were there. Maybe an octothorpe worth of hand gestures.
It's not a number. It's a symbol. Oh, Carl.
So we originally were going to talk into a whole other thing. Do you want to?
Well, I mean, so
I'll give the broad stroke.
I do enjoy. I would say, like, if we could probably try to dive into it a little bit, just because. I mean, either way, like, we're going to stop this and we're going to talk about a little bit more because I was also like, interested in a lot of this stuff too. So
yeah. Okay. So for Taylor's sake, I will continue.
No.
And this one, I
can
do
pause.
screenshots.
This is you can pause, go get a drink of water, come back to this later, go back to solving that code problem you were stuck on. Whatever you got to do, you can always come back later and hit play. This is our intermission time of if you need to get up and whatever, go get your snack.
Oh man, I could go for a snack right now. I'm really hungry. All right,
you could
here
always
we go.
How far through are you through your cheese ball tub? Is it gone already, Carl?
I'm glad you brought up cheese balls. So no, I'm trying to lose weight. I vacillate, and I'm at the age where you just got to keep on it because I don't get a lot of exercise, and my job is sedentary, and I'm in my 40s, so it ain't getting any easier. And so I told myself, Carl, look, you've been trying to reach this goal, and it's not a lot, but it's just a small goal for weeks, months now. No more cheese balls until you reach this goal. You need to get serious with yourself. And so I've not had
serious.
Cheese balls. Yeah.
Oh,
and it doesn't seem to be helping at all. Motivation wise.
Well, that's the tough part. Like, cheese balls just end up getting replaced with something else, right?
Yeah. It's sad. No one cares. I won't go into it. All right. So
Carl, you can start training for a sprint triathlon too. That'll help. No. Well, if it comes to managing like weight, if goal is weight, like, unfortunately,
food. It's gotta be
food is just the number one thing. Yeah.
Well, I was actually going to join the gym again because I walk while I work. I got a little trip up back here, things like that. But the trouble is, it's just no time. You got kids, you understand how it is.
Yes.
But I watch the kids in the morning so my wife can do stuff, and then in the evening the gym is closed, the one by me, like by 9 or 10 o'clock at night, which is a terrible time to be exercising anyway.
It is, yes.
But that's just the reality we're in right now.
That's the only thing that's ever worked for me. It's just waking up earlier.
Yeah.
I'm a morning person though, so
yeah, you're something.
We told them to pause and go get drinks, or I'm a Thorpe. You're an Octa? Like, what is
yeah.
Nocta? Octa? It's close. My only plug for that before we just got a spin bike for home. Now, anytime I can't make it to the gym, it's closed, whatever. It's raining, so I can't run outside. Like, bam, just 30 minutes. Good to go.
Oh,
That's
we
all I'll
got
say
one of those
about it.
too.
That's all I'll say about it.
Yeah, I can't do that for 30 minutes. I'm sorry.
Just put something on the TV. Like I've been watching the Ahsoka series on Disney. Just
Oh, yeah.
while I'm peddling, Just watch some Star Wars,
That's a good point. I need to get a better seat. The one we have is pretty uncomfortable.
Bike shorts.
Okay. Yeah.
Let's talk about this the branding and checkout extensibility stuff, man. That's
everyone's gone now. We can talk about whatever we want.
We can, yeah.
Yeah. All right. So I'm gonna put a screenshot. This was an interesting puzzle that came to me. Someone said, "Hey, Karl, can you make this work?" They had an existing Plus store, and they had used the ability to customize certain aspects of checkout using the checkout.liquid. It's not a template. What's it called? Is it a template? Whatever. Layout.
Checkout.liquid. Yeah. Okay.
I think it's layout.
Just
whatever you call it. Yeah. That thing. And I was like, oh, well, I don't know. Let's find out. And so I found out. It took a lot of time. And this is one of those things too. Like at some point, I kept checking with my clients, like, "Hey, look, I've spent X amount of hours. This is where I'm at. I'm not for sure it's going to work out. Do you want me to continue?" And they said yes. Second time, "Do you want me to continue?" Well, yes, but cap it at this, right? So that's if you're in that position as a consultant, you're starting to feel that unease about I have spent way more time on this than I would want to pay anyone to do. Like it's worth checking back, just seeing what they're thinking. Because
good communication, like checking with the client. You'll be surprised how much people are just like, yeah, it's cool, But yeah, like that's usually the feedback. Like I only want to take this part, so that's awesome.
Right. Good call. Which is what I would want if I were hiring someone. Right. It's like you spent 20 hours doing what? Like that was like a worth $10 thing to me if you can make it work, not a like spend the whole week getting it to work kind of thing. Okay. Communication. So I, have messed around with functions and checkout extensions on some level, but I hadn't done a lot with the customization and the branding. And this one took me a while to wrap my head around, and I'm still not sure I'm completely wrapped it around yet. And once again, this is something where I feel like my lack of familiarity with certain aspects of front-end development was potentially hamstringing me because some of the concepts I had to learn, I made a list. Okay, here's the list of all the concepts I had to learn going into this. GraphQL, which I knew, but you're always learning more, I feel like, with GraphQL. Design systems, which is an aspect of Shopify I hadn't messed with before. Color schemes. Had never messed with the color scheme before. I wasn't sure in the context of the checkout extension docs what they meant by that. Were they referring to the color schemes? That there's other mentions of it throughout Shopify, so that was one of them. Checkout branding API, new to me, hadn't used it before. Checkout UI extensions. I've done some checkout extension work, but this felt a little bit different. And then when you dig into it, there's a lot of questions I had around how all those pieces fit together. So again, that's where the context or the lack of context, I wonder, was hamstringing me. So I tried real hard, figured it out myself, there's some tutorials around styling the checkout header. They show you some stuff. But it was really hard to understand how different aspects of the branding API, color schemes, and checkout UI extensions all work together. For example, let me just share the screenshot. Maybe that will help. For example, screen, window, this window, share. There. See, I was saying that out loud for the sake of our viewers who are wondering, what was he doing? All right, so I'm sharing a screenshot now of a checkout page. And what they wanted was this. They wanted their color changed. They wanted a logo in the top left corner, which is an image. And on the far right, across the top, they wanted another image and two links, one to a phone number, one that says email us. Seems easy enough. Seems super practical. And in fact, if all you want to do is change the background color and add a logo image, you can do that without messing with GraphQL or a checkout extension. You can just do that right in the checkout profile editor where you can customize it if you're in a Plus store and have that functionality enabled. I should be very clear about that because it's not enabled by default for a lot of folks. That's my impression anyway. You correct me if I'm wrong, Taylor.
Well, you have some limited settings right at checkout, but yeah, as far as like the header, yeah, you're pretty limited on what you can do. There's a couple of defined placements for a logo with an image. Before we had to just like upload a background color with an actual image, so you would just like adding a picture, which was so weird. I don't know why that was the case. Maybe somebody smarter than me knows that. But so yeah, you could do the very basic, color header, logo placement in the specific defined places. But yeah, everything else that you're talking about, yep, plus only for sure.
So the image color, I can get it done. Like, oh crap, I feel stupid now spending 4 hours of research realizing you could have done it to the editor. But then I realized these last two requirements, this other secure checkout image and the email us link and the phone number, that was something that you just couldn't do unless you cheated, like you said, and used like a background image, but then it wouldn't be clickable because those links, the email and the telephone link, actually do something. So then it became clear this is going to have to be a checkout UI extension. That was the only way this was going to work. And so looking into how to make that work, I discovered a couple of things. One is if you want to change the color, that has to be done through GraphQL. Again, you could do it through the profile thing, but I was doing it through GraphQL. If you want to change the size of this heading up here, like this is a particular size of the heading, there's different settings. That again was something I could do through GraphQL. And so let me show you what I ultimately ended up doing because this was interesting to me. And I'm still not completely sure I understand how this was meant to work. I'm tracking it down though. I've been reaching out to some folks. I went into the source on GitHub for these checkout UI extensions and was reading through some issues and stuff. And so it's becoming a little more clear, but sorry, I'm just trying to share.
That's okay. And that's a good call out too, that this stuff is on GitHub. So that's we'll link that up in the show notes too here. I'll snag that as well.
Yes. Okay. This is what I'm talking about here. All right. So if you haven't used the GraphQL app yet, that's another call out. This is Shopify's GraphQL query app thingy majigger that you can get, and there's no direct link to it in the app store. You have to like go to the page and click the link, and it will self-install. But it's super handy if you like GraphQL, which I can't say that I like it yet, but I'm getting to the point where I don't hate it as much. That's helpful.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I think it's so the thing that has helped me with GraphQL, because I find it frustrating, but then I talk to people that are way smarter than me at GraphQL as well, just in general, but also their expertise in GraphQL. And they're using a lot of techniques that I'm also doing, where I'm just like running a bunch of different queries to try to find the data that I need. And so, it's helpful to hear that from other people that like, that's the strategy.
Now, okay, Taylor, look at the screen because I'm out of the studio. I'm looking at a different browser. If I change these tabs, is it changing on the screen? What are you typing?
Yeah, it's changing.
Okay, great.
I was grabbing the install link for the Shopify GraphQL app.
Thanks. We all heard it.
I wasn't just typing your queries.
So, okay. First thing I want to point out is that you actually can control the header logo using Checkout Branding API. And the way you use the Checkout Branding API is through an object called the Checkout Branding Upsert, or mutation, whatever the correct profile is. And to do that, you have to have the Checkout Profile ID. And to do that, you have to get those. So the very first thing you tend to start with when you're doing this is a query to simply get all the Checkout Profile IDs. You run this query, and for those that aren't at home, it's a pretty simple query. We'll have it in the show notes. But it returns a list of checkout profiles, which presumably you have created through the admin interface. Go to settings, go to checkouts, and then you will see a default checkout profile if you have that feature enabled, and you can add multiple other ones that you can play around with and elect which one is published, just like with themes. So it returns the ID for that. So you need to get that to start off with, and then you can start using the Checkout Branding API. And Checkout Branding API has a bunch of stuff on it, including customization section that has a bunch of different areas. And so for our purposes, we're just primarily concerned with the header. And here we can set a couple different things. And so the approach I ended up using was I'm using GraphQL to set the color scheme and the position, padding, and alignment. I have the logo in here because at one point I was setting the logo through here. But when I switched to using the Checkout UI extension, I no longer do it, but I'm using it because I'm nulling it out just in case it was still in place. Because if you had set the image through the Checkout Profile editor, it would still be in place. Anyway, so you can see the variables I'm passing into this query are the profile ID, so the profile I'm working with, and then some of these built-in I guess, property values. So for the position, start just means left justified, essentially. Padding gives you that size. I want the largest one, so I want the large 500. And then same thing for alignment. I want start. So again, I think that's left justified. Still not clear to me what those actually mean in practice sometimes. And then for the logo image here, you see I'm setting the media ID to null. That's a whole other thing we could talk about. If you want to set the image through here, you have to get the media image ID for it, which you can do with GraphQL. We won't go into that right now. And see, I'm setting it to hidden. Oh, the visibility of the header. This is the logo image and the visibility. I found that it was displaying like the store title. It's like, how is this on here? Because it's called the logo, and you have to hide it if you don't want to see it, which is not the same thing as a logo image. So there's a text aspect to the logo and an image aspect. So if you're wondering why am I saying my name? Yeah, that's a good call. So, any questions here, Taylor, before I just keep stumbling my way through?
Nope. This makes sense. Okay. I was pulling up the docs too while we were talking about this because I don't know if you have some as well. We'll definitely want to include some in the show.
Oh yes, I got
especially as you were referencing that stuff. So yeah, I'm taking some notes here, but trying not to be too loud with my keyboard.
One call out I want to make here is this one right here, this color scheme. So this is again something that I still feel a little mystified by. So there are 4 color schemes in Shopify, and they all have the same properties and values. And I was trying to figure out like what is going on with these color schemes. The first thing I was trying to figure out is why are there 4 of them and what is important about them. And I found some documentation. I can't remember exactly where it was, but it essentially said scheme 1 is used for primary surfaces like the main areas of checkout. Scheme 2 is used for secondary surfaces like the order summary of checkout. And the implication was scheme 3 and 4 were just kind of unassigned to anything and you could do whatever you wanted with them. Okay. So I didn't want to take over everything. I just wanted to take over the header. And so what I ended up doing, and again, dear reader / listener, if this is the wrong way of going about it, let me know. I ended up taking over color scheme 3 kind of as like my custom playground to do whatever I wanted with. And so I'm applying color scheme 3 to the header specifically here. And so what that does now is it's isolated the header from the other color schemes. And so any other changes you make won't affect it. And this is, sorry, I'm stamping here. This is where I really was struggling because it's not clear in the editor what color scheme you're impacting when you use those UI controls to make changes. Does that make sense? Like if you're changing background colors, like what color scheme is that? It's not clear. And then when you actually look at a color scheme and look at the properties of it, so here's where I'm going to update the color scheme. It's got a whole bunch of properties and sub-properties. It's not crystal clear to me like what those actually target on what you see on the screen. Mm-hmm. You can kind of get a sense, I think, roughly, but it's not super clear. And so you kind of have to mess around with it and just see what works. That's kind of what I was doing, the old guess and check approach.
Which is my general experience with GraphQL.
Yeah, it's how I approached mathematics in college too. And it worked great until I was in a class where they only ever did multiple choice, no partial credit exams. It's like, oh, this is not going to go well for me. And in fact, it did not. But funny fact is, when you take the class the second time, they don't change the homework. So,
well, there you go.
just cheat code. Yeah. So, have you worked much with color schemes, Taylor? Have you ever seen them on this level where they've been exposed as the naked properties that they are?
Nope. No. So the branding stuff is something that's been on my to-dos, but it isn't something that's been like high up enough on the list to prioritize looking at. So I know when we were talking about this, I was like, I've got this way down the backlog for one brand to like update their, because you can do custom fonts or whatever, right? But it just hadn't made it up the list at all. So you were definitely further along than I was as far as like looking into this. But color schemes, no. And even playing around with like the docs in here, like there's just not a lot of like real specifics. Like when you look into it, even it's like the color scheme 1 color scheme selection, color scheme 2, the color scheme 2 color scheme selections.
Right.
Okay, what does that mean?
And so if you see my screen now, I'm looking at I'm in the GraphQL app for those following along. I'm looking at the Object Explorer, or the GraphQL Explorer. I'm showing you a schema. My presumption was that they use color schemes in theme development too. So if you're a theme developer, you're probably more familiar with the color schemes and typically what these associate to. And so probably they just assumed it would make sense. But if you've never come at this before, it's like, okay, there's a base. What is the base control. Like, how does this, if you apply scheme 3 to an aspect in the design, checkout branding stuff, like how do those things map into the different stuff on there? It's just, that's where I felt it was kind of nebulous. But I finally figured out that I could use my custom scheme, set a background color, set a text color, all that stuff is working. Actually, the text and accent color, this is leftovers from me trying to screw with something, so ignore that.
Just ignore it.
Just ignore it. There's some other stuff here I could talk about with getting files. We're not going to do that. We're going to go back to what I eventually had to do. So let me talk through the last bit of it, and then we'll wrap this up and people can get on with their lives.
Well, this is interesting because I did not think until after you said that like people are more accustomed to that with themes, because I feel like color scheme is like pretty new even for themes, and so I was like looking at that specifically. I think that's interesting.
Yeah. So it may be, and if you read it, be like, well, Karl, it says right here, this is what this does, and be like, well, oops, but this is where it was. Okay,
so you can create color scheme groups, yeah, but as far as that goes from a theme perspective or whatever, I don't know if it's just they're kind of like with everything else in checkout, there are predefined groups, and so it's just these are the 4 you have. You can create additional ones in themes if you want, but like these are the 4 you have if accessible at checkout. Do what you will with them, and they should be tied though to settings. So that's interesting.
What really threw me off were these darn links in the header. So what I ended up doing is, okay, this is the screenshot again, blah, 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 there's a screenshot. Okay, I'm going to link to this because when you click on these links, they turn to the visited state, which all links do when you click them, and they're blue. It's like, no, they need to be white. Darn you. Why aren't these white? It's like, how can you control that? And it turns out, Taylor, you cannot. You cannot control that.
Oh, so a limitation here with the extension then, as far as that goes?
Yes. And so I'm going to show you the extension code itself. So here's what I ended up with for the code. I don't know why the syntax how things be wonky here. Yes, I use Sublime Text. Don't judge me. But I'm using an image for the logo instead of setting it directly in GraphQL or through the checkout profile thing. I'm setting the image here. That's easy enough. I just give it the URL to the asset. And then I'm using an inline layout to lay out basically 2 columns. The image is over here on itself, and then another inline layout where I'm doing the secure checkout image and followed by that telephone number. Oh dear.
Yeah, it's a little off there. I can blur that in post, I think.
Can you? Okay.
I think so.
I'll put it back on. Hold on a second, guys. Yeah.
So real quick, as far as like we're talking about like the branding settings and stuff, so I believe the idea is that, in your Shopify section settings, not section settings, I'm sorry, just in your settings in Shopify, there is just, you go down to settings in the admin, there is a brand series of items here where you can actually get into colors. And so I believe, they've got primary and secondary, but obviously that doesn't sync up, one-to-one with what would be color scheme 1, color scheme 2, aside from our color schemes 1 and 2, then the primary and secondary that are set up in your settings. Are those linked together? And then, so it's safe to play with 3 and 4 to create your own at checkout? I'm not really sure. I don't think that part feels very clear. And that I don't know if that's where you were headed as far as going down that path. But the brand settings and stuff like that, I know we can access via like a custom data property too. So it becomes accessible like a meta field or whatever, like in the editor, which is really nice when it actually works the way it's supposed to. But yeah, I don't feel like it's super clear as far as these color schemes go, if that's like where it's pulling from, because the terminology is different, obviously, between the front end and what we can see if they're using GraphQL or even elsewhere. Yeah, it's a little off there. I can blur that in post, I think.
Can you? Okay.
I think so.
I'll put it back on. Hold on a second, guys. Yeah.
So real quick, as far as like we're talking about like the branding settings and stuff, so I believe the idea is that, in your Shopify section settings, not section settings, I'm sorry, just in your settings in Shopify, there is just, you go down to settings in the admin, there is a brand series of items here where you can actually get into colors. And so I believe, they've got primary and secondary, but obviously that doesn't sync up, one-to-one with what would be color scheme 1, color scheme 2, aside from are color schemes 1 and 2 then the primary and secondary that are set up in your settings? Are those linked together? And then, so it's safe to play with 3 and 4 to create your own at checkout? I'm not really sure. I don't think that part feels very clear. And that I don't know if that's where you were headed as far as going down that path. But the brand settings and stuff like that, I know we can access via like a custom data property too. So it becomes accessible like a meta field or whatever, like in the editor, which is really nice when it actually works the way it's supposed to. But yeah, I don't feel like it's super clear as far as these color schemes go, if that's like where it's pulling from, because the terminology is different, obviously, between the front end and what we can see there using GraphQL or even elsewhere.
Well, the big thing is I'm going to share my screen. I scrubbed it now, so we're good here. But is these components. So originally, these are images now, but I had these just as links. And what I came to find out, and it took digging through the source, and again, maybe someone who's more familiar with React and other components like players knew this already, and it does actually say in the docs. It just isn't very clear, so it took me a while to find it. But you cannot style any of these components with any kind of CSS. The only styling available to you are the properties that they expose that you can pass in, right? And so essentially the link is useless if you always want it to look a certain way, because it's always going to change. You click on it. So this is where I didn't understand. I really wanted to understand, like, where is it getting it from? It's okay if you can't control it, but where is it getting it from? Is it being informed by the checkout branding API, all this kind of stuff? And it is to some extent, but I think there's still a level of like just lack of clarity into how those work. Even looking at the source, it didn't become super clear to me. Long story short, I just said, screw it, I'm going to work around this. I always want these to be white and not underlined, so I just used images, and luckily you can add images inside the link. Yeah,
and that works.
Doesn't work as
which
great.
Stinks that you have to do that, right? Like you have to like do this hacky workaround instead of like the semantic proper element of just like this being like a text link, like,
Yep. And so same thing with the spacing. Like the spacing's weird. Like they give you some properties to add in, but it just, as you move things around, change screen size, it doesn't always work the way you'd want it to. So it didn't feel like a great solution, but it was a solution. And I feel like now I know more about how this works, which is good. But also there's some definite limitations. It's just not the same with CSS and HTML that you could control. So
yeah, and we've talked about this quite a bit with checkout extensibility, right? Like there's this like idea where there are a lot of predefined decisions that you just have these options, and so you're choosing the least worst in some scenarios, right? And the good of that is, I think it was when we had Sammy on, he referenced kind of like checkout.liquid being like the Wild West, which is true. Like sometimes you'd get into these checkout.liquid files that are like hundreds of lines long, and you're just trying to like sift through it to figure out what you need to port over to checkout extensibility now. And so definitely as far as stability goes, checkout extensibility is definitely great. I do hope they're going to continue to extend this out, though. I think they will in the future, right? Because they have to get to the point where it was like one-to-one for what we used to have, right?
Yeah.
So,
and I know I'm complaining a lot, but the same token, it occurred to me after I kind of wrapped this up that, there's a lot of power here too. I didn't try it, but I'm pretty sure some of those API components will work too. It's like you could display all kinds of crazy stuff in your checkout header, using some of the data that you can now get basically for free using these components, these hooks, I guess they're called, for the API and stuff like that. So it's like, okay, yeah, there's some definite limitations, but there's a whole new world of really cool possibilities to you that just weren't possible before.
Yep.
I was just thinking, like, if you wanted to display, like, if you place this order now, you'll be our 10,568th order. I think you could probably do that using a hook to get, number of orders and things like that. Assuming that's in the hooks. I don't even know what's in the hooks right now, but just thinking about it's cool.
Yeah, you can definitely get more custom for sure. It's just, well, to an extent, right? There's just some things that are kind of like off limits for now. So yeah, it'll be interesting to see how it evolves. I think it is better. The biggest thing, or the biggest step forward, I think, for checkout extensibility that people really downplay right now is before everything in checkout.liquid was not accessible if someone chose Shop Pay. 100%. Like you couldn't like you customize all this stuff, you made it look really nice or whatever, and someone chooses Shop Pay and all of a sudden like like nothing works like you wanted it to. And so at least now, like it's stable, right? Like which is definitely like much more in line with what you would want. You know, so I see it as like mostly positives, but yeah, like there's a lot of stuff where it's just frustrating, especially when you're having to explain to a client. You used to be able to do this and now you can't. So, but we can do this now, so it is that part's kind of hard.
Yeah.
Dealing with that when you, at least when you're doing client work, right? That's really hard to deal with.
Yep. So I hope that was helpful. There's obviously a lot more I learned there, and I can include some gist and stuff like that. Some of the code, people want to see those examples. But yeah, it was a fun descent down upstart lane there with the checkout branding API.
Yeah, that's awesome, man. Well, and I'm glad you learned something about that because I'm going to benefit from it. If I'm trying to bump my backlog up, I can maybe get some of that branding API stuff going here. So I just have to get a custom font running. So that seems a little bit easier than all the stuff you were trying to hack here. So
I think you can do that right through the interface. Yeah. But, at the end of the day, I feel like the same lesson applied here that applied.
No, you have to use the branding API for a custom font still.
Oh, do you?
You can't.
Custom font.
You can't set it. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Okay. Which was this, like, going into this, I had a way that I thought this ought to work. You ought to be able to control the link visit state. You ought to be able to do this and that. And at the end of the day, you have to at some point let go of that, realize this isn't going to be the way it's supposed to be. And is there a way to make this work with the tools I have? What is that? In this case, there was a path for it, but it won't always be the case. But that is what it is.
It is what it is.
I'm exhausted now.
Yeah, I'm tired.
Those things probably, yeah.
Tired.
Too much talking.
No, it's okay. And we'll skip the changelog if you want to jump to picks. I mean, there's some good stuff in the changelog, but I don't think there's anything like super duper necessary to click cover. So I think we'll be all right.
Sorry, Taylor. It's your favorite part of the week, I know.
Favorite part of the week. Just go check the changelog. This is your reminder. That's it.
Well, we can post that in the show notes too. Not that it'll matter in 4 weeks, but did you want to do your pick of the week first?
Ooh, no. Yeah. As far as a pick the pick of the week for me is going to be, and I don't know if this is cheating. We had him on. So Daniel Beck's app. So yeah, with the so from AbleStar here, where they've got their I was just gonna say it's the product options app, but I don't know if that's actually what it's called offhand. I should have had this ready to rock. The bulk product editor. So there is this really cool function. We ran into this weird scenario. Not weird scenario with a client where we are trying to surface in search, and Shopify search is kind of not great. And so we were trying to surface in search. We've added the secondary data point with meta fields for products where it describes the product. So we have like the title of this product, but then we have a more descriptive kind of like subheading, if you will, kind of type thing going on. And that's helpful for a couple of reasons. Like SEO is a big benefit as well because it's more descriptive and all this other stuff or what have you. But the problem is those descriptive items, because they're in meta fields, they're inaccessible via search. Okay. So not awesome, like not helpful for clients or customers because they're going to be searching based on those descriptive keywords, not necessarily the product title itself, right? And so was trying to figure this out, took to Twitter to complain, as one does, as I do anyways. And Daniel was like, I'm pretty sure we can do this with product boosts. So take a look at this or whatever. I'm like, man, yeah, but I got all these products. And, he was super cool about it and was like, well, not to like throw my app at you or whatever, but like, here's a really good example of what you could do this with they have this really cool like run custom codes function. So we talked to him about this when he was on. And what we did was we just looped through all the products and added product boosts. So in Shopify, you can do a couple of different things with the search and discovery app. One of those is synonyms, but synonyms are very limited in their functionality. You can only assign one specific synonym to a product, which is not great when your products are kind of similar. And then all this other stuff. But product boosts specifically, they do show up in predictive search and then also in search results much more easily. And so basically worked with Daniel to get this going, and he made me look awesome in front of a client. The app worked great, and so that is my pick of the week is AbleStar, Daniel Beck's AbleStar's bulk product editor app. Super solid, works like a charm. The issue that we ran into specifically was we had to like split these long tail keywords up, so that's why we needed that. We couldn't just dump all of those in there because otherwise it doesn't work. Where if somebody typed out this big long tail keyword, you're not going to get it in predictive search, and if they didn't type it exactly. So we did a split on that with Liquid, which was really nice that you could actually run some Liquid in there to break up that meta field and then insert that into product boosts. So highly recommend. It was very cool. He did not ask for me to suggest anything here. He just thought it was a really cool use case and all this other stuff. And so very grateful that we got to talk with him. But super
cool.
Super good use case for that. No.
Yeah, so grateful that you're going to write up a little blog post about it that we can put in Liquid Weekly and so everyone can read about it.
Yeah, I need to. I told him, I was like, if y'all don't, I'm going to need to write something because this was super helpful. Made me look really good in front of a client. So,
and that's rare. So
it's hard to do. That's how good the app is.
That's awesome. Well, my pick of the week is timeliness, and I picked that one because I'm realizing I'm about to be late for a lunch appointment. So I'm not going to say anything more than that. No, it's my fault. I just kept yammering on. But yeah, timeliness. It's good to be on time.
Timeliness. It's good to be on time. Awesome. Very good. Well, that's all I got, man.
Cool. Well, thank you, Taylor.
We'll get some of that other stuff. Those code examples. Get some gist for the people. Okay, cool.
And if you made it this far, thank you so much. If you got feedback for us, let us know. We're always open to feedback and love to have other folks on in the future. So we'll see ya on the next one. See you, Taylor.
Catch you later.